VSGL. I'm no lawyer, so can you explain how the Church of Scientology can hide behind the U.S. First Amendment for all of its abuses? I would think that in the free exercise of religion, you would still have to abide by the law, regardless of whether the person is or was a member or not. All right, I'm not a lawyer either, and I haven't particularly gone and talked for hours on end with lawyers about this. So what you're going to get here is an unlawyerly answer from my understanding from the reading and study that I've done on this as to how this works. Basically, in the United States, the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the free exercise thereof. It seems that the courts in the United States are very, very cognizant of and very careful around that free exercise clause. They don't want to be messing around with that because it's literally a constitutional right. It is one of the most basic rights afforded to U.S. citizens. It exists, as I understand it, from various interpretations for the protection of the religions themselves, as well as the protection of the non-religious or the government and the individual people. It goes both ways. So how this has been interpreted in various court cases, and specifically in regards to Scientology, is that if a person agrees to rigid discipline or strict rules and guidelines that a church runs itself under, and this includes any church. Think, for example, like separate out from Scientology for a second and look at Catholicism or like Catholic, like monks in a monastery. These are people who lead a very ascetic life. Same with maybe Buddhist monks. They don't necessarily eat everything they want to. They don't necessarily get as much sleep as they want to. In the case of Catholic priests, they don't get, I think I said Catholic monks before. I meant, monks, just Christian monks. But in the case of Catholic priests, they take vows of celibacy, so do monks. So they don't have, because of the rules and restrictions of their religious practice, they don't have the same freedoms that you and I have. And that's all voluntary, and at least it's viewed as voluntary under the eyes of the law. You have freely given yourself over to the rules, the regulations, and also the disciplinary practices of that religion. So if you're in a group that calls for flogging, right, or beatings or something like that as a form of religious expression, then the court is going to back up the religion because it's viewed by the court that such floggings or disciplinary measures, harsh measures like denying food, denying sleep, maybe having things done to you that some of us who are not agreeing to that might consider even a form of torture if it was done to us. Well, if it's done to a person under the strictures of their religious practice, and they're doing it voluntarily of their own free will, as viewed under the law, which can become a gray area. I'll talk about that in a second. But if the law views it that way, then you don't have a leg to stand on if you later change your mind and go to the courts and say, they tortured me, they denied me food, they denied me sleep, they flogged me. The court is going to go, well, look, dude, you were there as a member of a religion that is recognized by the United States, of course, as a religious group. And we don't have any say in telling that religion how it is to go about conducting itself. Now, the line, of course, on this would be drawn when it comes to something like murder, right? Or something like, gross child abuse, where you're, like sexual abuse, this kind of thing. I mean, there are lines drawn on this. As a non-lawyer, I can't tell you exactly where those lines are drawn, and I suspect that it's a rather gray area. If sexual rights and practices are part of your religious practice and you're there voluntarily having sex, I don't think you're going to have a leg to stand on if you later claim you were raped. And I'm talking about guys and girls, right? Men and women on that. As an example, right? I don't think there's any situation where you could beat up on a child or sexually molest a child in the name of religious practice, because I don't think that a child would be viewed under the eyes, of the law as having been a willing and knowing and informed participant in that practice. And from my understanding, that would be the guiding principle. So in a recent podcast that I did, we talked about, I think this was with Jonathan Streeter, actually the last one I did with the ex-Mormon. We talked about the fact that at any time while you're part of a religious group, you can stand up and say, I resign. I no longer agree to be part of this religious practice, and I am no longer a member. And if you just simply say those kinds of words, there's no set words to it, but something to that effect, then you are no longer under, you would no longer be acknowledged by a court as volunteering to be part of that practice. And therefore, that religious group could no longer do those things to you because you've made it clear you're not a willing and active participant in the religious practice, okay? So that's how you would get out of a situation like that. That's the voluntary line. If you never say those words, if you don't ever, say, hey, look, this is not okay with me. I'm not okay with what you people are doing to me. I don't want this. I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. If you don't say those words, then it's assumed that your earlier agreements of being part of that practice still stand. And so you're opening yourself up to potentially being abused according to whatever the rituals, rules, and guidelines of the religion are. This is all the way across the boards, every religion recognized within the U.S. So this is why in the mid-90s, when Mark and Claire Headley brought a case of human rights violations and criminal activity against the Church of Scientology, it never even got past the discovery phase, the initial phases of the legal system to even make it into a court and even make it in front of a jury, because the judge said, look, you guys were there as Sea Org members at the international base, and we acknowledge that there were things that were done that were kind of uncool. But to say that those were human rights violations doesn't really hold water, because you were there voluntarily and you never said you weren't. So, and I don't know that the judge actually said those words, but that was basically the reason why it got thrown out. So that's why, having learned about this and having learned about the fact that you can say, I resign, I'm no longer part of this, I don't want this anymore, and that gets you a pass out of the whole situation, right? This is an important piece of information to have, because then the church organization now no longer has First Amendment protection to abuse you once you make it clear that you're not a willing participant anymore. All right, so I think I've made all that pretty clear. And as far as I understand it, the reason why this is so important is because if the government or a judge who is not part of that religious practice, doesn't understand the dogma, the beliefs, the rituals of it, starts making arbitrary rules about what you can and can't do in a church to express yourself religiously, then they're crossing a line over into your rights, right, as a believer. If you want to go practice the religion of Ugg and eat mushrooms on every Tuesday, a court should not necessarily be able to, in a free society, should not be able to step in and say, no, you can't have mushrooms every Tuesday, you have to have red meat. They can't. You don't want to give the law or the courts that kind of power in a free society where you want to have a free expression of art, of speech, and of religion. This is just something that the Founding Fathers decided was very important, and the courts have interpreted those words and that expression of the First Amendment in that way. Now, when it comes to destructive cults, where the courts kind of lose it is under the matter of undue influence. or coercive persuasion. This is not necessarily, in the United States, a recognized thing, right? In other words, they don't recognize brainwashing, right? Or mind control, or, you know, whatever words you want to use to describe the manipulation that occurs through deception and lies and peer pressure and things like that. So the court assumes you are, you know, intelligent, able, and voluntarily part of the whole process. And that doesn't factor in being deceived into the process and then finding yourself trapped in a situation through various manipulations that keep you there, really, at that point, against your will, right? And if you don't know to say, I don't want to be part of this, but even more deeply, even if you did know to say, I don't want to be part of this, but you're married into it, all of your friends are in it, like there's all these social dynamics that enter into the situation that don't really get a say in a court of law as I understand it. Now, if any of you out there have information or knowledge about this outside of Scientology or with Scientology cases, please let me know in the comments section, because this is obviously something I'm still learning about, and I'm more than happy to learn more about it and pass that information on to you guys. So go ahead and leave any comments or notes about this on this video, and maybe we will take this subject up again, but I think I've talked about it enough for now.